Title: Simple Man Saved Lady from Sinking Sand. Unaware she is a billionaire CEO, she changed man life. The morning felt ordinary, yet strange. Jason Miller, a man in his early 40s with sun-hardened hands and a calm, thoughtful face, had lived in the same modest cottage on the edge of a sleepy Texas town for nearly 2 decades. That morning, like so many others, he woke before the sun, brewed a pot of coffee, and stepped out onto his creaky porch. The sky was still soft with dawn, a blend of peach and pale blue. He sipped his coffee slowly, pulled on his worn boots, and set out on his usual morning walk, a ritual to clear his mind before the day's work began. The wooded trails behind his property wound along a dried-up creek bed, once fed by spring rains. It had been a dry year, and though the underbrush was thick, the ground crunched beneath his feet. Jason carried a small backpack, just water, a pocket knife, some rope, and a flashlight, though he rarely used any of it. But something felt off that morning. As he walked deeper into the brush, a strange stillness fell over the land. Even the birds were silent. Jason paused. The hairs on his arms stood up. Then, a scream. High-pitched. Frantic. Female. It cut through the forest like a siren. Jason didn't hesitate. He took off running, heart pounding, dodging low branches and pushing through the brush. He didn't know what he was running toward, only that someone needed help. Less than a minute later, he saw her. A woman, mid-30s, blonde hair soaked and plastered to her face, mud up to her waist, was sinking fast into a hidden patch of marsh. It had been years since Jason had seen it. Fed by an underground spring, it sat just beyond a bend in the trail, disguised by tall grass. She was flailing, panic in her eyes. Her designer blazer clung to her like a second skin. One high heel was long gone. Jason dropped his pack, hit the ground flat, and reached out. "Don't move too much," he shouted. "I've got you. Just hold on." She gasped, struggling to stay above the sucking mud. Every movement dragged her deeper. Jason reached for the straps in his bag and quickly tied them into a makeshift rope. Bracing his feet against the base of a tree, he tossed the strap toward her. "Grab it. Wrap it around your arm." She did, barely holding on. Jason pulled, inch by inch, boots digging into the dirt. It felt like hauling cement. Her eyes met his, wide, terrified, but trusting. With one final yank, she broke free and tumbled forward, collapsing onto solid ground. They lay there for a moment, breathless and mud-covered, the forest silent around them. She coughed and turned to him, voice trembling. "You saved my life." Jason sat up, checking her over. "You all right? Anything broken?" She shook her head slowly. "No, just shaken." Jason helped her sit against a tree, offered her water, and wiped her forehead with a rag. She looked like someone from another world, her jacket clearly expensive, her nails manicured, her smartwatch blinking with missed notifications. She didn't belong out here. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked. She hesitated, catching her breath. "I took a drive to clear my head. Thought I'd hike a little. GPS stopped working. I must have wandered off trail." Jason nodded, still puzzled. "You're lucky I came through when I did. That patch can suck a person down faster than you'd think." She gave a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Yeah, lucky." They sat in silence, adrenaline slowly fading. Then Jason stood, offering her a hand. She was caked in mud but held herself with quiet poise. "I'm Jason," he said. "Claire," she replied, brushing hair from her face. She didn't offer a last name. Jason led her back to the trail, walking slowly. She asked simple questions. If he lived nearby, what he did for a living, how often he walked these woods. He answered modestly, unaware she was studying him just as closely. And just like that, the quiet life of Jason Miller began to change. Claire leaned on him slightly as they walked. Her designer clothes hung heavy with water, her body still trembling. Yet she kept glancing at Jason, this quiet, broad-shouldered man who had pulled her from the earth like an anchor from the deep. 15 minutes later, they reached a narrow stream, clear and shallow, water gliding over smooth stones. Jason knelt beside it, cupped his hands, and splashed his face. Claire hesitated. "You can use it," he said gently. "It's clean. I've been drinking from it for 20 years, and I haven't grown a tail yet." She gave a weak smile, then dipped her hands into the cold water, gasping at the chill as she washed off the mud. Jason turned away, giving her privacy, pretending to adjust his pack. Neither of them noticed her silver smartwatch, its clasp weakened by mud, slide loose and fall silently into the open pouch of Jason's backpack. After a moment, Claire sighed. "Thank you. You didn't have to help me, but you did. That's rare these days." Jason shrugged. "Would have been wrong to walk away." She smiled faintly, eyes drifting to the stream. "You sure you're okay to keep walking?" he asked. "My place ain't far." "No," she said quickly. "Thank you. Really. I think I've got enough strength. I parked not far from here. I can find it." Jason hesitated. He didn't want to leave her alone again, but something in her voice told him she'd made up her mind. "Well, all right," he said. "At least take some water." He handed her a bottle. She accepted it with both hands. Their fingers brushed. A moment passed. Something unspoken lingered. "Jason, right?" He nodded. "I won't forget this." Then she turned and walked away, vanishing between the trees, mud-streaked, proud, and carrying secrets like shadows. Jason stood a moment longer, watching the spot where she disappeared. Then, with a faint shake of his head, he slung his backpack over his shoulder, turned toward home, and let the mystery fade into the rustling leaves. Back at his cottage, Jason dropped the pack beside his workbench and headed for the kitchen. The day's heat had finally caught up to him. He poured a glass of iced tea and stood by the screen door, watching the wind ripple across the golden fields. Her face lingered in his mind. Expensive clothes, distant eyes, and a silence that felt more like a wall than calm. He didn't know her last name, didn't know where she came from or why she was alone in the woods. But somehow, it didn't feel like an accident. Still, Jason wasn't one to chase ghosts. He chalked it up to a strange morning and turned to his tools, comforted by the familiar click of metal and oil. Later that night, Jason sat in his shed, going through his backpack. He pulled out the rope, his thermos, and then something unfamiliar. Sleek, cold, still blinking faintly. He frowned. It was a smartwatch, drenched in dried mud. He wiped the screen clean and saw a glowing message. "Connection lost. Locating." Jason blinked. He didn't own a smartwatch. Hell, he didn't even have voicemail. He tapped the screen. A logo appeared. Clare Industries, a stylized C wrapped around a globe. Jason frowned. Well, hell. He set the watch down on his workbench and stepped away. Technology always made him uneasy, things buzzing and blinking, tracking you, talking back. This thing, it didn't belong in his world. But miles away, high above the city skyline, Claire sat at her desk, fingers flying over a digital map. The missing watch was more than an accessory. It had data she couldn't afford to lose. It had recorded everything. Her fall, Jason pulling her out, and more. After hours of searching, she finally traced the signal to a small neighborhood far from the skyscrapers and private boardroom she knew. A modest house. His house. Her SUV rolled to a quiet stop outside. She stepped out, smoothing the folds of her designer coat, her eyes landing on the simple front door. Jason's silhouette stood inside, motionless. She took a deep breath, and walked toward the man who had saved her, without knowing he just altered both their lives forever. Part 2. The Goodbye Card. Jason stood at the kitchen counter, unwrapping the sandwich Claire had brought. His hands, used to rusted bolts and frayed wires, trembled slightly as he picked up the neatly folded piece of paper tucked beneath the sandwich wrapper. A small envelope, light blue, with one word on the front, "Thank you." Inside was a card, simple, floral, and handwritten. "Dear Jason, I don't know how to begin, but thank you. You didn't know me, but you gave me warmth, safety, and kindness when you had every reason to walk away. That night, I was not just cold on the outside. I was tired of being invisible, of struggling, of feeling like I didn't matter to anyone. I had nowhere else to go. But you made me feel seen. That changed everything." Jason blinked, scanning the rest of the card, heart thudding harder with every word. "I told you I was waiting for someone. The truth is, I was. But not the way you think. I was waiting to disappear. To be swallowed by the cold and the silence. But that night, your garage, your gesture, it reminded me that life still had flickers of good in it. You saved me, Jason. I left the city the next morning and checked myself into a recovery program in Portland. It's been 6 months. I have a job now. I'm even starting school again in the fall. I'm writing this because you deserve to know what your kindness did. It gave me a second chance." At the bottom, there was a name he hadn't heard until now. Claire Donnelly. Jason sat down slowly, the room seeming to narrow around him. His sandwich untouched, his fingers traced over her signature again and again. A strange tightness gripped his chest, a mix of pride, sorrow, and something else, connection. He stared at the letter long after the ink dried, replaying the night she came into the garage, shivering, eyes rimmed red, her silence deeper than winter air. He'd wondered then what brought her to that edge. Now he knew. And yet, she hadn't just survived. She'd fought. She'd turned that moment, his moment of decency, into a reason to keep going. To rebuild. He folded the letter and slid it into his wallet. The next morning, something in Jason had shifted. He arrived at the auto shop earlier than usual. The place still smelled of oil and coffee, and the air compressor hummed softly in the background. But for once, Jason's mind wasn't on car parts or bills. It was on Claire, on the quiet courage it must have taken to crawl back from that place. Halfway through the day, his boss, Rudy, noticed him smiling more than usual. "You win the lottery or something, Jace?" Rudy grinned. Jason just shook his head. "Nah, just got a letter. Made me think maybe things matter more than I thought." Rudy raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Jason couldn't explain it fully, but the card had ignited something, like gears turning after sitting idle too long. He felt alive in a way he hadn't since his dad passed away. Helping Claire had been instinct. Hearing her words made it feel like purpose. That evening, Jason sat at his small desk, something he rarely used except for balancing bills. Now, though, he was writing, something he hadn't done since high school. "Claire, you probably didn't expect me to write back. But your letter, it knocked the wind out of me. I never imagined that night meant so much. Truth is, I just saw someone who needed help. And I've been there, not the same way, maybe, but close. I'm glad you got out. Glad you're healing. You have no idea how proud I am, and I barely know you. I kept wondering what happened to you. Now I know. And knowing that maybe I played even a small part, that means more than I can say." He paused, thinking, then added, "You said I saved you. But maybe, you saved me too. If you ever want to stay in touch, here's my number and email. No pressure. Wherever life takes you, Claire, keep going." He signed it simply, Jason. The letter was mailed the next morning. Jason didn't know if she'd reply. Maybe she wouldn't. But that wasn't the point. Sometimes, kindness is a single brick. And sometimes, it's the start of a bridge. 3 weeks later, Jason got a call. A soft voice on the other end. "Hi, Jason." He froze. "Claire?" She laughed nervously. "Yeah, I got your letter. Took me a few days to work up the nerve to call." Jason's heart thudded. "I'm really glad you did." There was a long silence, not awkward, but filled with a kind of quiet that comes from two people remembering the same night from different ends of pain. They talked for over an hour, about nothing and everything. Claire told him about her recovery program, her new apartment with sunflowers on the window ledge, the coffee shop job that made her feel human again. Jason told her about the garage, about Rudy, about the sky that looked different lately. At the end, Claire said softly, "Maybe we could meet again sometime, when it feels right." Jason smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." And in that moment, across the phone line, they both knew. One cold night, one act of compassion, two changed lives. Jason had never been one for long phone calls. In fact, the last time he'd spoken on the phone for more than 10 minutes was when his brother called to say their mother had passed. But that night, after hearing Claire's voice again, the minutes slipped away like they were old friends catching up after years. Though, in truth, they'd only met once. Still, something about her words lingered. Her voice was different now. Steadier. Hopeful. It reminded Jason of someone standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing there's more beyond the drop. There's a bridge they never saw before. Claire had offered to stay in touch, maybe even meet someday. And Jason, who never thought twice about future plans, suddenly found himself wondering what that meeting would feel like. Over the next few weeks, they kept talking. Sometimes just for a few minutes. Claire on her lunch break from the cafe, Jason on his way home from the garage. Other times, the calls lasted longer. Nights where she'd sit near the window and tell him about the stray cat that kept showing up, or the older lady upstairs who baked muffins for everyone on the third floor. Jason would listen quietly, occasionally laughing, sometimes just letting her voice fill the space in his apartment that had once been filled with only silence and late-night sports radio. She sent him a photo one day, just a snapshot of her new apartment, books stacked in the corner, a kettle on the stove, a hand-painted sign on the wall that read, "Begin again." He stared at that image longer than he meant to. Something about it tugged at him, the effort, the warmth, the way she was rebuilding her life one layer at a time. Jason didn't talk much about himself, not at first. But slowly, he opened up. Told her about his dad, how the man had run the garage before him, taught him everything he knew about engines and spark plugs. Told her how, after his dad passed, Jason had lost a lot more than just a father. He lost the idea of who he was supposed to be. Claire listened, never interrupting. When he paused too long, she filled the gaps with soft words. "You didn't lose him," she said once. "You're carrying him. Right now. In the way you help people. In the way you help me." That night, Jason sat with her words long after the call ended. And for the first time in years, he pulled his old sketchbook from a drawer. He had once dreamed of designing motorcycles, custom builds with hand-drawn flourishes, machines that felt like art. Life, though, had other plans. Bills needed paying. Dreams got buried under transmission fluid and overtime shifts. But Claire had sparked something in him, the sense that it wasn't too late to dream again. Then came the day she asked, "Would you come visit?" Jason froze. He thought about it. A lot, if he was being honest. But hearing her say it made it real. Made his palms sweat. "I mean," Claire continued quickly, no pressure. I'd like to see you. For real. Not through a phone." He smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that too." So, he packed a bag. Not much. A change of clothes, his sketchbook, and the goodbye card that started it all, still folded in his wallet. He took a few days off work, telling Rudy it was a long overdue visit with someone important. Rudy just raised an eyebrow and gave him a knowing smirk. "About time," he muttered. Portland was colder than he expected. Wet and grey, but not in a way that felt miserable. More like a city perpetually caught between stories. As he stepped off the bus and looked around the neighborhood Claire had described, Jason felt that odd mix of nerves and curiosity he hadn't felt since his first date back in high school. And then he saw her. Claire stood outside a corner cafe, a yellow beanie pulled low over her ears, a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She smiled when she saw him. Wide, real, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Jason crossed the street slowly, unsure what to say. But Claire didn't wait. She stepped forward and hugged him. No hesitation. No awkwardness. Just warmth. "I wasn't sure you'd really come," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you'd really want me to," he replied. She pulled back and looked at him. "I did. Every day since I sent that card." They walked for a while, sipping hot coffee from mismatched mugs she'd borrowed from the cafe. She showed him the bookstore where she spent her weekends, the bus stop where she once cried silently for 30 minutes, the community center that helped her find her footing. "You saved me that night," she said again, standing in front of a small mural of a phoenix painted on a brick wall. "But here's where I started flying." Jason watched her, his chest full of quiet pride. "You saved yourself," he said softly. That evening, she invited him up to her apartment. It was tiny, barely enough room for a bed, a desk, and a half kitchen, but it was hers. Every detail spoke of someone reclaiming their space in the world. Notes scribbled on the fridge. A chipped mug with the word fighter painted across it. A stack of therapy books beside a small wooden Buddha. Jason looked around, then handed her something, his sketchbook. She raised an eyebrow. "You draw?" "Used to," he said. Stopped for a while. "But your card reminded me there's still more in me than oil stains and engine noise." She flipped through the pages. Custom bike designs, dream builds with sweeping lines and fierce curves. She lingered on one page near the back. A motorcycle with wings, flames etched into the metal, and a woman standing beside it in a scarf and boots, wind in her hair. "Is this me?" she asked, her voice small. Jason nodded. "I guess I saw you that way. Strong. Moving forward. Rising." She was quiet for a long time. Then she set the sketchbook down and leaned into him. "That night, I wanted the world to forget me," she said. "But now I want to make it remember." Jason didn't speak. He just held her. Over the next 2 days, they became more than just phone voices. They walked in the rain, laughed over street food, shared stories they hadn't even told themselves before. It was easy, strangely so. Like two puzzle pieces that didn't know they were missing each other. When it came time for Jason to leave, they stood at the bus terminal, unsure what to say. "Come back," she whispered. "I will," he promised. Then she handed him something, a new card. Handwritten. Sealed. "Open it when you get home," she said. Back in his apartment, Jason sat at his desk and opened the envelope. Inside was a short note and something else, a photo. The note read, "You gave me back my life. Now I want to be part of yours, if you'll let me. Claire." The photo was of Claire, standing beside a mural of a phoenix. But this time, she wasn't alone. Jason was beside her, mid-laugh, their hands just barely touching. A moment captured, a story still unfolding. Jason leaned back, heart full, and smiled. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Part 4. Jason sat in the worn-out armchair by the window of his small living room, his fingers tracing the edges of the coffee mug as the morning sun filtered through the blinds. The world outside his humble home felt distant, like something that belonged to someone else. He could still feel the weight of the previous day's events pressing on his chest, a mixture of confusion and disbelief clouding his thoughts. Claire's words from yesterday kept echoing in his mind, her offer so foreign, so out of reach. The idea of stepping out of his quiet, solitary life into something grander, something uncertain, was both tempting and overwhelming. He had spent his whole life in this small corner of Texas, working with his hands, living simply, following the same routine day after day. The thought of entering her world, a world of wealth and power, seemed like a leap into the unknown, a leap he wasn't sure he was ready to take. He wasn't blind to the offer. Claire had extended an opportunity that most people would never even dream of. Help, resources, a chance to change his life. But at what cost? Jason wasn't naive. He knew that nothing came without strings attached. In her world, everything had a price. There were deals to be made, favors to be returned, and expectations to meet. It was a world that demanded more than just hard work. It demanded compromise. As Jason gazed out the window, he saw a family passing by, parents and children laughing as they walked down the street. Their simple joy reminded him of the life he had chosen, a life of quiet solitude, but one that was his own. He could hear the faint hum of a tractor in the distance, a sound he had always associated with comfort, with home. It was familiar, reliable, and he had never once questioned it. But something inside him stirred, a quiet voice urging him to consider the possibilities. Could he really turn his back on something that could change everything? Could he live with the regret of never knowing what could have been? As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard a car pull up outside. The sound of tires crunching against gravel roused him from his reverie. He stood up, his mind still swirling, and walked to the door. When he opened it, Claire was standing there, her sleek SUV parked just outside, looking as out of place in this quiet town as she had the day before. "I've been thinking," she said without waiting for him to speak, her voice calm and sure. "I know this is a big decision, Jason, but I'm not asking you to decide right now. Just think about it. Think about what you could do with a little help." Jason nodded slowly, still uncertain. "I've lived here my whole life, Claire. I'm not sure what a bigger life would look like for me." Claire smiled faintly. "It's not about the size of your life, Jason. It's about making the most of what you have, using your skills, your heart, and your mind to build something that matters. That's all I'm offering." She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I don't want you to feel like I'm pushing you into something. This is about you choosing for yourself. You saved my life, and I owe you a debt. But I also see something in you. Something more than just the man who lives in a small house on the edge of town." Jason felt his heart race as he looked at her. There was no denying the sincerity in her voice. It was the kind of sincerity that came from someone who had seen too much and lost too much. Someone who had learned the value of making things right. "I don't know, Claire," Jason said quietly, his voice rough. "I've spent my life working with my hands. I'm not sure I'm the kind of person who belongs in a world like yours." Claire's smile softened. "I don't think anyone really belongs in a world like mine. It's not about belonging, Jason. It's about making a difference, no matter where you start." There was a pause as both of them stood there, the weight of the decision settling in the air between them. Jason felt a stirring in his chest, a flicker of possibility he couldn't quite ignore. What if he could change his life? What if he could take that first step toward something more? "I'll think about it," Jason said at last, his voice steady. "I can't promise anything, but I'll think about it." Claire nodded, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read his thoughts. "That's all I ask." As she turned to leave, Jason closed the door behind her, his thoughts racing. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like the possibilities were endless. Later that day, Jason found himself back in his shed, the sunlight filtering through the wooden slats as he worked on a tractor. The rhythmic hum of the engine filled his ears, and for a moment, he was lost in the simple pleasure of the work. But even as he turned the wrench, his mind kept wandering back to Claire, to the world she inhabited, and to the choice he would have to make. Could he really step into that world? Could he leave behind everything he knew to chase something uncertain? Something that felt both exciting and terrifying? Jason's fingers tightened around the wrench as he thought of Claire's words. Think about it. It was hard not to. Every part of him wanted to cling to the life he knew, to stay in the comfort of the familiar. But there was something inside him, something he couldn't ignore, that whispered of a different path, one that could change everything. And so, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the shadows of the day stretched long, Jason Miller made a decision. He wouldn't be a man bound by his past. He would be a man who took chances, who stepped into the unknown. For the first time in his life, he was ready to change his world. The only question now was, would he find the strength to take that first step? Part 5. The choice that changed everything. The days that followed were strange, like a fog that couldn't quite lift. Jason found himself unable to shake the thoughts of the woman, Claire, and the offer she had made. His mind churned with questions, but none of them seemed to have clear answers. Every time he went outside to work, his eyes would catch on the small, shiny smartwatch on his workbench, reminding him of the life he hadn't expected to cross paths with. He wasn't used to wealth, to people offering more than what they seemed to want in return. The whole situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie. He had lived in his cottage, worked the land, and kept to himself for so long that the idea of stepping into her world, her polished, high-tech world, felt impossible. Yet, when Jason looked at the watch, he saw something more than just a device. He saw the choice that could alter everything about his life. It was early one morning when he made up his mind. The wind carried a strange stillness across the countryside, the birds just beginning to chirp, as Jason made his way to the shed. He grabbed his coat, throwing it over his shoulder, and locked the door behind him, taking one last look at his home. He had spent so many years here, filling his days with work and solitude. And now, it was time for something else. Jason wasn't sure how to prepare himself for what was coming next. The small town he had grown up in, the life of simple pleasures, felt so far removed from the offer Claire had presented. Yet he felt a pull, something beyond logic, beyond the quiet life he'd known. He drove to the edge of the town, heading toward the highway that would lead him to the city. His hands tightened around the steering wheel, but he couldn't help the surge of adrenaline that ran through him. This was his chance, a chance to step into a new life. As he drove, his thoughts kept drifting to Claire. What did she see in him? Why had she made such an offer? Jason wasn't sure if he had the right answers, but the mystery was as compelling as the pull of the unknown future she had offered. The city skyline appeared in the distance, towering glass buildings rising from the earth like something from another world. As he entered the city limits, Jason felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. It was as though he had crossed a line he could never go back from. Claire's office was located in one of the tallest skyscrapers in the city, a glimmering reflection of modernity. He arrived, unsure of what to expect, and parked the truck in the underground lot. He took a deep breath before stepping out, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. Inside the building, the elevator ride to the top floor was a blur. Jason stood there, his reflection in the polished walls, his worn boots a stark contrast to the sleek, modern decor of the building. The door opened, and he was greeted by a receptionist who led him through a hallway lined with contemporary art. At the end of the hall, Claire's office stood, a large space with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a breathtaking view of the city. As Jason stepped inside, he saw her standing by the window, her back to him. The room smelled of fresh flowers and expensive cologne, an aroma so foreign to him that it felt like walking into a different world. She turned as he entered, offering a smile that was both warm and knowing. "Jason," she said softly, "I'm glad you came." Jason nodded, his throat tight. The choice that lay before him seemed overwhelming now that he stood in front of her. But there was no turning back. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough, but determined. "What now?" Claire stepped toward him, her expression serious. "Now, we begin." The journey ahead would be anything but easy. There would be adjustments, ways of thinking, of living, that would challenge everything he had known. But in that moment, Jason knew one thing for certain. This was a chance to become more than he ever thought possible. And he was ready to take it. As they spoke, she led him through the next steps, their business ventures, the resources she could provide, the opportunities for growth. For the first time in his life, Jason felt like a part of something larger than himself, a world that was as exciting as it was intimidating. It wasn't just about wealth or status. It was about potential, about the doors that had opened to him, doors he had never dreamed of walking through. Weeks passed, and Jason slowly adjusted to this new life. He wasn't a billionaire CEO, but he had gained something valuable, skills, knowledge, opportunities, things he never would have had in his quiet Texas town. Yet, even as he settled into his new role, the pull of the land, the smell of the earth, never left him. Jason still visited his cottage on weekends, sitting on the creaky porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the fields. And when he did, his thoughts always drifted to the woman who had saved him as much as he had saved her. Claire had given him the chance of a lifetime. But in return, Jason had reminded her of the simple things that money could never buy. Together, they both learned that sometimes the greatest changes come from the most unexpected places. And so, Jason Miller's life had been transformed, not just by the billionaire CEO who had entered his world, but by the choice to step into a future he could never have imagined.